One of my biggest concerns with Bernie Sanders running, and I think I've mentioned this before, something that I think it's somewhat of a weakness, has to do with, believe it or not, it's the same thing that kind of, in some degree, is a strength of his ideology. Ultimately, Sanders has a way of thinking about running in presidential campaigns or running in races. He sticks to policy. And that's a good thing. And that's one of the reasons that people consider him to be authentic. He tries to be honest as a politician can be honest, more so than most. And he, for the most part, tries to stick to policy. The catch here is ideology makes a poor substitute for reality. And at times, how you go about running a race will require you to be a little bit more flexible in the way that you go after a particular candidate. Killer instinct, for example. This ability to put somebody down and to win a one game, whether that's chess, whether that's politics. Sometimes you get opportunities to try to end someone where you don't have to deal with that person going forward. Enter one Joe Biden. Joe Biden has been limping along ever since Iowa, especially after New Hampshire, and what's looking to be potentially even Nevada, and is trying to make a last stand in South Carolina. Now, the trend for Joe Biden had been with him for like a year, leading, especially in the context of the black vote, especially in the context of older voters. And so my recommendation was to attack Joe Biden on the items to which he was strongest on: electability, African-American voters, and the elderly. And because of a long career where he's effectively been attacking those things that those particular groups care about, either the criminal justice plan, they're working with out-and-out racists to affect policy for busing or putting African Americans in prison, and Social Security cuts. Like, those are things that were instrumental that Joe Biden had been pushing for decades. You shouldn't have need to require and prod Sanders to hit him on those items, especially when it was a situation where Joe Biden was extremely weak on those items. You ended up in a situation where Biden attacks Sanders, Sanders counter hits, but the counter hit didn't have to be a counter. It could have been something that you went after him on outright. I hope you understand what I mean. Everything is not necessarily entirely about policy. Yes, even that particular fight is about policy, so on a particular level, but it had more to do with finding him, lying, and having Joe Biden to be exposed as a liar as you're going after him, nailing him on a particular policy he's trying to run away from. I hope you understand what I mean, but it shouldn't necessarily require prodding from your team to be able to go after somebody, especially if there's an opportunity to put that person out of the race. If Joe Biden loses in South Carolina, his theory of the case, or at the very least his last stand, would have been, for the most part, found wanting. And there would be no reason that he could justify maintaining himself in a race. He's already hurting for cash, and not just hurting for cash. He's skipping Nevada outright, which means Sanders is going to be running into South Carolina with a head of steam, assuming for the moment that he actually wins Nevada. What happens if a state where Joe Biden was winning by 20, 30 points at one point, if he loses that state? And how do you justify remaining in that race if your core constituency, meaning under Joe Biden, the blacks are with me, the blacks are with me. If your core constituency gives you up, what happens? Meaning, how do you justify continuing in the race, continuing getting money from billionaires and plutocrats, and staying in the race if the place that you would have had your best chance you lost in? Now, I can tell you, Sanders is only 6.5 away as an average in the polling. So from the standpoint of doing well in South Carolina, yeah, Joe Biden has collapsed magnificently. Now, a lot of this has to do with, who keeps the monsters at bay, and not just who keeps the monsters at bay, the situation of record, policy, especially when you get into a situation where your key element of, I'm the guy that could beat Trump, starts to evaporate. As it's evaporated, his lead has started to shrink. And the question becomes, is Joe Biden going to be able to hold off Sanders, especially if he is coming from Nevada with a head full of steam after another win? Meaning, with your key argument down the toilet, meaning electability, with a contingent of your vote total going to people like Buttigieg, especially if you're talking about the elderly, or even Klobuchar in some cases, talking about the elderly. And if your argument, meaning policy and everything else, is not something that people were on board for, meaning your only key thing was electability, and that started to fade. Yes, you may get a contingent of African Americans that may be higher than other candidates, but will it be enough? And if it's not going to be that 20-point number that you were getting before, can you actually win in South Carolina? That number has dropped significantly. And Nate Silver is predicting that Sanders takes South Carolina. I am predicting he takes South Carolina. But what I would hope for is that he puts in a knife, twist it counterclockwise one good time. Because the way that you go about Biden or getting Biden to South Carolina is to take down his particular demographic, the last demographic that's remaining with him in any sufficient numbers. Take down the electability, take down the elderly, and yes, go after the African American vote, especially in South Carolina. And the way you do it is by, again, exposing hypocrisy. The hypocrisy that was there from the standpoint of the Social Security fight, where Sanders made the point that Joe Biden was talking about Southern Social Security. Joe Biden lied about it. And Sanders ends up doing a video showing that Joe Biden was lying about it and exposing the hypocrisy all at once. What if you do that with Joe Biden on civil rights? Joe Biden has been running around the country telling people that he was some instrumental part of the civil rights movement, that he was part of it, that he was out there in Selma and he was doing this and that, and he was one of the movers and shakers. He has been going from black church to black church to black church, making that very specific argument. Now, the reality of it is, this is baloney. Joe Biden was not part of the civil rights movement. Don't just believe me. You can believe Joe Biden himself, because Joe Biden has in the past said he had nothing to do with it. So it's this cultural appropriation stuff. It bugs the shit out of me. Elizabeth Warren can go and claim that she's a Native American for 40 years, and people just give it a pass. Joe Biden can go out and claim that he was part of the civil rights movement entirely for political expedience in order to con black people into voting for him, despite the fact that he's responsible for many of those family members of those same black people being in prison for onerous terms. For fuck's sake, Joe Biden was going after people for drugs when his kid was a crackhead. Like, how onerous this man's career is. Yes, it bugs the shit out of me that there are people of my racial persuasion that is out there voting and shilling for him. And so this particular video to me is the video that Sanders needs to take note. Shaun King, whoever is, he's on Sanders' camp. Shaun King is doing Sanders a disservice if he doesn't go to Sanders and say, Sanders, get this video into the hand of every African-American church that you can get your hands on in a particular radius in South Carolina, and put a bunch of cash into airing this particular video. Add your own panache, add your own pizzazz to it, do what you need to do to it to make it shine, to make it sting and all that stuff. But the video should be run. And the notion that Joe Biden was working in the civil rights movement, the times in which he'd been lying about it, and then showing Joe Biden saying he had nothing to do with it, has to be a video that you air for due diligence in order to put a knife and finish Joe Biden off in this particular presidential race. I'm going to show you the video. It's already been created. Shout out to The Guardian. To The Intercept. And let's take a watch. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal patron. This content is brought to you by you, so we like to say even a dollar helps. Now, tomorrow is going to be the first day of Political Misfits. Political Misfits is the show that I'm doing for Sputnik radio station. It comes on from 12 to 2, Monday through Friday, and it's a radio show. It's a full-blown radio show in D.C. I think we're like a block away from the White House. So join us. You're free to call in, and anything that we do on the station itself is going to come through the channel. For the 12 to 2 time slot, we're going to have all sorts of interviews every day, guests, segments, the works. So, not to mention camera angles. It's not like the radio station in Richmond. It's a full-blown, real deal. So, it's going to be good. We've been doing dry runs for the past 2 weeks, and yeah, I think we're ready. I mean, there are going to be still tweaks and everything else as we go about it. We just get better as we perfect the product. But ultimately, it's been a lot of fun working with Bob and Michelle, and I think you guys are going to enjoy it. So, like I said, feel free to join us. feel free to call in. We're going to have call-in times and all this other good stuff. And we'll give the number out and everything else when we're doing it. Oh, and I think it's 105.5 FM if you are in the Washington, D.C., Maryland, Northern Virginia area. All right, now that the announcement is over. So this is Joe Biden. And again, Joe Biden has been going to black churches telling people this mantra that he was part of the civil rights movement. Let's listen to the reality of it.
This movement. I did not march with a 12-point program. I marched with tens of thousands of others to change attitudes. And we changed attitudes.
When I was 17 years old, like many of you, I participated in sit-ins to desegregate the restaurants and movie houses of Wilmington, Delaware.
I came out of the civil rights movement. I was one of those guys that sat in and marched and all that stuff. During the 60s, I was, in fact, very concerned about the civil rights movement. I was not an activist. I worked at an all-black swimming pool in the east side of Wilmington, Delaware. I was involved in what they were thinking, what they were feeling. I was involved, but I was not out marching. I was not down in Selma. I was not anywhere else. I was a suburbanite kid who got a dose of exposure to what was happening to black Americans when I'm in my own city.
Do you know how aggravating that is to me? That is so fucking aggravating to me. Like, that's the honest bare bones. I was not a part of the civil rights movement. I was not in it. I was watching it. You know, I was kind of in the malaise of it all. But that hasn't stopped this same Joe Biden from coming out over and over and over again. I've done video after video where I've shown you Joe Biden standing on the stage effectively lying to a lot of people. I got to be honest. I've watched Joe Biden over the course of his political career. I did not know he lied to this extent. This is some Trump level lying. And I would even argue it's worse than Trump level lying. Trump lies to a way where you know he's lying. It's over the top. But Joe Biden is given a certain credibility that Trump is not given, and is given a benefit of the doubt that he should not be given. Whether that's on the issues of Social Security, where he's dodging his record, whether that's on the issue of Iraq, where he was trying to dodge his record, or where it's on this, which, for obvious reasons, this one is more onerous to me. I hate the fact that the African American community would vote for Democrats like this and be so beaten down with cynicism over the course of the last 40, 50 years, where this notion of expecting and believing that your government can actually accomplish things is off the table. They're willing to settle for somebody like Joe Biden, especially with the history and the record that he's had. This shucking and jiving for the civil rights movement, saying, oh yeah, I was part of this. And then you find out, no, he wasn't. That should be blown up like nobody's business. The moment that you tell somebody who's an African American and they're a Joe Biden supporter, and you show him real terms, him lying, and then you show them the truth, then this notion of them using race as a prop in order to get himself elected becomes distasteful. Let's say it that way. Meaning it makes him harder to vote for him. And it's not just harder to vote for him for something that's a bullshit claim. This is not Tom Perez trying to call Bernie Sanders the white candidate. This is literally a white candidate claiming to be part of a movement that he had nothing to do with. And if he had anything to do with it all, it was to make it more difficult for that level of integration to take place with the policies and the races that he was walking around arm in arm with. Yes, this should be a video that is blown up. It's aggravating to me that Joe Biden is able to skate on this.
You know, when I was a teenager in Delaware, for real, I got involved in the civil rights movement. We have the 8th largest black population in America. Most people don't know that. And I'd go to 8 o'clock Mass, then I'd go to Reverend Herring's church where we'd meet in order to organize and figure where we were going to go, whether we were going to desegregate the Rialto movie theater or what we were going to do. I got my education for real in the black church. And that's not hyperbole, it's a fact. But I got my education, Reverend Doc, in the black church, not a joke. because when we used to get organized on Sundays to go out and desegregate movie theaters and things like that, we do it through the black church. I was no big shakes, Reverend, in the civil rights movement. I was just a kid. I got involved in desegregated movie theaters and helping, you may remember Reverend Moyer in Delaware and Herman Holloway organized voter registration drives.
Question. How does that make you feel? How does that make you feel? White, black, gay, straight, anywhere in between, whatever. And look, we each have our own experiences in the world. Each of those experiences are valid in the sense that we're perusing in this kind of subjective way. But to me, this is a white man, which in the grand scheme of things doesn't entirely matter, but it matters in this case just because of the specific context that we're talking about, claiming to being part of the civil rights movement. The reason he's claiming to be a part of the civil rights movement, this is his, I have hot sauce in my back pocket. But this is worse than I have hot sauce in my back pocket, because he's claiming to be a part of something that took place that moved, you could say, the consciousness of the country from a perspective in the way it looked at one of their members of society, but not just, but also into law, like the way the law regarded people of this particular racial persuasion, the policies, the laws, the redlining, all of these things, this integration effort that came about where people were getting killed left and right in order to kind of push the society forward. He is claiming to have some part of that. And that he's getting in front of black churches, looking black people in the face, saying it over and over and over again at one opportunity after the next. Effectively, what you know is now lying about it. And the reason he's doing this entirely is for political expedience. He wants to get elected. He wants to get the black vote. And so he believes that conning African Americans into voting for him by trying to associate himself with this actual movement is the way to go about doing it. The other person in the race, in literal, real terms, marched with Martin Luther King. The other person in the race, in real terms, was chained to an African American woman during the civil rights movement, meaning actually part of the civil rights movement. I guess I'm making a point that it is so onerous to me, and it digs in me like nobody's business, that Biden gets to skate on this from the standpoint of mainstream media. Mainstream media allows him to skate on this, just like they allowed Pete to skate on pretending and using those 400 black people as props, and you find out they weren't black people at all. Most of them were white, and the media, for the most part, didn't give a shit about it. Well, in this case, this seems to be a bigger deal to me, and Joe Biden, no consequence. He can famously lie and doesn't get called on that lying in one location after the next. Yeah, that bites, especially when he's using it for political effect. He's using an entire race as a prop in order to get into the White House. So when I make the point that says, yes, Sanders, who are representing a younger demographic in this case that is not wed to the party in this particular way, and even if you weren't representing anybody else, just from your philosophical job as a campaign, should blow this out the water. Meaning you should represent those people, that group, that demographic that you yourself was marching for and pushing for. It should bother you and bite you that you were the one that was in the civil rights movement, taking those hits, taking the people being spitting on you or whatnot. And this suburbanite kid, as he calls it, comes in and stands in your limelight, undeserving of it. That should bother you, meaning Sanders. It should bother that camp. And I would imagine Shaun King needs to get that angst across in a way that tries to get them to exploit this particular issue, because the issue should be exploited. It's legitimate. Joe Biden is claiming something and appropriating a movement that he had nothing to do with. And again, you can make a strong case that the disparities between crack and cocaine that Joe Biden didn't necessarily care about when it was up to putting people in prison, but totally cared about and wanted compassion when it was his crackhead kid. Yeah, I don't particularly like Biden all that much. And this makes me like him that much less. This is exploitable, and it should be exploited. And I got to be honest with you, the moment that you tell people You know, he really wasn't part of the civil rights movement, even though he was claiming to be part of the civil rights movement. They say, no way he did that. And then you show him the video, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth. White, black, across the board, I would imagine nobody likes or wants their culture to be appropriated entirely to be used as a prop for their own political expedience. Whether that's Warren pretending to be a Native American or whether that's Biden pretending to be the second black president or something. It's aggravating. Massively fucking aggravating that he's getting the support. And let me show the beginning again, just so you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. So right here, this is Joe Biden in his own words, despite the fact that he's out there also in his own words saying he was part of the civil rights movement. This is him saying, yeah, I really wasn't part of anything.
When I marched in the civil rights movement, I did not march with a 12-point program. I marched with tens of thousands of others to change attitudes. And we changed attitudes.
When I was 17 years old, like many of you, I participated in sit-ins to desegregate the restaurants and movie houses of Wilmington, Delaware.
I came out of the civil rights movement. I was one of those guys that sat in and marched and all that stuff. During the 60s, I was, in fact, very concerned about the civil rights movement. I was not an activist. I worked at an all-black swimming pool in the east side of Wilmington, Delaware. I was involved. I was involved in what they were thinking, what they were feeling. I was involved, but I was not out marching. I was not down in Selma. I was not anywhere else. I was a suburbanite kid who got a dose of exposure to what was happening to black Americans when I'm in my own city.
You know, when I was a teenager in Delaware, for real, I got involved in the civil rights movement. We have the 8th largest black population in America. Most people don't know that. And I'd go to 8 o'clock Mass, then I'd go to Reverend Herring's church where we'd meet in order to organize and figure where we were going to go, whether we were going to desegregate the Rialto movie theater or what we were going to do. I got my education for real in the black church. And that's not hyperbole, it's a fact. But I got my education, Reverend Doc.
If Bernie Sanders got caught doing this, effectively saying, I was part of some movement, and then you find out later that he had said earlier, let's say 10, 20 years prior, that he was not particular part of that movement, how does he continue in the race? I mean, and this is such a big lie. You get caught lying about Social Security, you get caught lying about the Iraq War vote, and you get caught lying about being part of a civil rights movement. That in and of itself should suck away all levels of black support from Joe Biden in this race. That is horrendous. That is horrendous. That gives you this idea of the quality of character that Joe Biden actually is. To literally get on a campaign trail, and it's as if he wasn't on video. It's as if he wasn't on video. Oh, that was 20 years ago. Nobody's going to find that video at all. Yes, Joe, people found that video. They found the video. I'll end it here because this is going to be me just bitching at this point. Fortunately, The Intercept exists, and The Intercept was able to compile these two videos. What I would strongly want is for somebody to get across to Sanders to clip that video in a way that gets across this guy is lying about his support for this particular movement. This other guy is not. I don't care how you make that video. It needs to be punchy. It needs to be sharp. It needs to show Joe Biden effectively saying in his own words that he's part of the civil rights movement, and then his own words showing that he was not. But this should not be allowed. Pete used Keegan-Michael Kay false endorsement. I saw that. Yeah, Pete does that shit too. But again, Pete flagrantly did that once before. Pete went with this thing of having the endorsement, supposedly, of 4 prominent African Americans. You found out that all of them were horrified that their name was being used. One of the guys ended up being an out Bernie supporter. Then he said there were 400 people that he gave the impression were black, and the majority of them were white. I mean, it's amazing the way they appropriate this stuff. To promote false transparency, the DNC will now be using an app developer for Nevada instead of Shadow Inc. The new company's name is Subterfuge. Subterfuge Inc. Subterfuge Inc. Rafael Rodriguez. You know, the sad part is, Rafael, we don't know who the app maker is yet. That's the sad part. Unless you're being serious. Honestly, I can't tell. You might actually be serious. There may be an app called Subterfuge Inc., knowing the DNC. But right now, that's going to be a fuckfest up to this point. That divide is a fuckfest. So, hopefully at some point, they would... Yeah, I'm always doubtful. I don't necessarily buy the way the DNC is operating. That's all. And so any error, any screw up, it tends to go against my guy. And because it tends to go against my guy, it makes me think to some degree it's almost intentional. Iowa has already happened, and Iowa was a train wreck. They were going to use the exact same application from Iowa. Then at the last minute, okay, we can't use that app because that app was a train wreck. So now we're going to use a tool that we don't necessarily want to call an app, even though the people haven't been trained on using that particular device. It is clear, it's all day, that there are problems in Nevada. And it doesn't necessarily seem those things are being remedied. So, just saying. All right, I'll leave this here, but I really hope Sanders brings this up as an issue. I really hope Shaun King can get it through Sanders to put some level of investment into this, even if it's just delivering this video to every black church that's in South Carolina in areas that Joe Biden may be ideally do well. It's politics. It goes beyond just making the quote-unquote policy argument. Calling hypocrisy and calling bullshit on hypocrisy is also one of the weapons that you have at your disposal, especially if you, as a candidate, has a tendency to be authentic. Like, share, and subscribe. Thanks all. See you in a few.